Lotus. Lots of trouble, usually serious, right? A very common acronym used to describe these cars. And being a Lotus fanboy, I would usually not agree with this. However, with my recent purchase of this V8 Esprit, it has been nothing but true. In a previous video we ran through this new purchase of mine. The car had sat idly for about 20 years or so, so it needed pretty much everything a car could need. We redid the gas tanks, ECU, clutch, timing belt, and many other things. And after I finished it, I parked it for a couple weeks to get onto some other projects of mine, and when I came back to give it a joyride, I was expecting a happy car and I was greeted with a very unhappy one. So we have three real problems with the car right now. One being the springs, the car doesn't sit right. The next would be that leak you just saw. One being as soon as you let off the throttle, come into a stop or whatever, it would just die. And I think that's the idle air control valve. And these things have been extremely expensive everywhere I've tried to find them. It's like $400 for that, and I just couldn't justify that, so I kept trying other things to make sure that it was that, but I think this is the problem. Now, this lives underneath the plenum in literally like directly right here, and it's bolted to the bottom with two 10 mils, and then it has like two hose clamps on it, so plenum has to come off to do that, which I absolutely hate doing. You can see that there's like a lot of connections down here. You got to take fuel off. You have to take off these blow-off valves because they go into your intake right there. This whole trunk panel has to come out, so it's a little more work than you would think. Even this has to get gone, but I ended up actually going on CarPart, which is where I usually go to find all my cheap parts, and this is an idle air control valve off of, I believe it was a Saab it was listed as, but I think this is just a generic across the board Bosch part, and it has the same connector and the same sticker as the idle air control valve that I have on my car, and I took a plunge on it. It was $200, so half the price everywhere else listed it as. So we're gonna pull this off. The only thing I'm afraid of is these go into really soft aluminum. So I've taken this off 10 times working on this car. I'm afraid I'm gonna start messing up those threads. So that's something I'm gonna be extremely careful with this go around, and we'll pop this off and see what we can do with this. And by this look right here, you can see how little room you have. You got to wedge yourself back up in there. So I'm going to do something that I did a long time ago when I was working on this. On my garage door, there is like this little tab right here, and I can't suspend this anywhere where the garage door is actually going to slide because it'll run into this, but I'm thinking about putting a wire or like something soft right here and then wiring it to right here and just kind of hoisting this up a little bit to the point where it won't come in contact with that garage door, and then we'll have a ton of room here because I can't remove this by myself. There's nowhere to put it. This actually weighs a ton given it's just fiberglass, so we're gonna see if that works. If not, I'm just gonna have to, wedge myself up in there. All right, this should be interesting. Gotta pop these off. I'm gonna get this pre-done. I'm using really thick speaker wire, so it doesn't cut. Like, that's pretty sharp, and I think twine would shear right through. So we're gonna pop these off. Take them off all the time, so it's not that big of a deal. Oh God, I forgot how heavy this thing is. It's gotta weigh 80, 90 pounds. Look at that. Okay. I feel like this is quite absurd. Would you look at that? A lot more room. I mean, this previously sat like right here, so I think I can actually get in there and lift that off now. Didn't even have to take the roof panel off because it's not quite contacting, but when I did my timing belt before, I just took this roof out and then folded this all the way back and put like a blanket or whatever right here. I don't think I want to go through all that work. Plus I can't in this garage anyway because that wouldn't clear that. So it's the best we got. Let's get into it. Over here you'll notice my old fans for the radiator we're gonna mess with later today. There's a new exhaust for my R8. We're about to cut that up and do some modifications. for a long drive we're about to do because I don't want to drone with my straight pipes. First thing we're going to do, just disconnect the electronics. We got a quick disconnect in the battery. Pull all the crap out of here. And this is actually a recent addition too. This carpet. This wasn't too easy to find, but for like a while I just rocked that right there. And with that, you will notice the handful of bolts that hold this thing on. We got to disconnect the water tank and then pull this whole thing out. And mainly just because we have to access a lot of this stuff down here. This is one of those days where it'd be great to have an electric ratchet because there's so much stuff here, but I stole it from my dad a while ago and finally decided to give it back to him. So don't want to take it back one more time. So we're gonna zip all these off real quick. And I forgot we've got ones up here too. It's like 6 or 7 in total. It's nothing crazy. And I love using the channel, my bolt storage. I drive this thing. It's not in perfect condition, so I don't mind throwing stuff around like that. I kind of have a just go for it, brute force type method of working on cars. And just like that, we can see everything. Here's the trans. There's this exhaust that I was talking about last time. Instead of just shooting straight back, we did some modifications there. And then it kind of curls around and comes out the center, and that extra length gives it a lot higher of a pitch, which is awesome. So this is actually like a really open, airy space. But what we need to do here is this section right here with our EGR and our blow-off valves and like our intake and fuel lines. This stuff all has to come off, and you just can't reach any of this stuff with that thing on. And then I can actually just sit on the transmission. Makes my life a lot easier, so we're gonna get to that. All right, let's get this thing going. So, dun dun, 17, 13, 10, 10. Okay, 17, 13, 10. This is awesome. You got a place to put all your stuff and a place to sit. Or you can stand. Let's get these things going though. These blow-off valves off. We'll just kind of throw those to the side. I haven't started this in a while, so hopefully the fuel pressure isn't going to be like out of control. We'll get the throttle linkage off. Here's the secondary injectors up here. These are off an S10. Pop those off. Map sensor's got to go. Start moving that out of the way. This is for the throttle body, I believe. Yep. Okay, now we're going to start getting these. This is the hard part right here. These little tubes, I mean, this is the turbo right there. That's what you can see. This line right here comes up out of the turbo. So this is the charge pipe. This is like 6 inches long. And then there's like a maybe inch gap between these two, and then the throttle body. Turbo goes directly into the engine. But this is hard to pull apart just because you can't pull it this way or this way far enough to get any room to pull that out. So I remember doing this in the past. That was my biggest issue. So we're just going to loosen these all the way up and deal with that later. You notice me shaking a little bit. Had a good amount of caffeine. Haven't had much food today, so when I get into these jobs, I tend to just go and forget to eat, forget to go to the bathroom, all that kind of stuff. You're just so into it. I love cars, love working on cars, so it's just, I don't know, it's who I am. Can't change it. Don't want to change it either, so I think next we're going to go get some adjustable wrenches. We'll take this EGR off. It's kind of in an inconvenient spot on both. It attaches right there. I don't know how easy that is to see. All the way down in here. And then over here, that one's pretty easy to get to. So Go grab some of those. See the position I'm in here. This is the normal one. This is an option too, or you can just sit. Today I'm choosing to kind of do a combination of everything. It would have been nice if I knew to do this while I had this off doing the fuel tanks, which was the worst job I've ever done on a car, still to this day. But we have a pretty solid Lotus now, so I can't complain. And I've done this probably 7 or 8 times on this Lotus and other ones, and never replaced those gaskets before. So we've never had a leak. Not going to replace these ones either. Parts come from the UK, typically, so whenever you need something, you can't just run to the store. Can't go to the dealership anymore either. Last time I did, they didn't even know what Lotus Esprit was. So next will come throttle cable. Just kind of trying to get the whole wiring harness aside, and you see this blue line right here? That is actually part of this idle air control valve. So there's one side that goes in right here, the other one's really hidden. So I can take this one off because the valve comes off with the plenum. It's bolted to the back of the plenum. Hence why you can't get to it. I usually kind of just wing these things like this. Never take any documentation of how I take them off or whatever. Had really good luck, but now that I take videos, I can just refer back to that. So let's crack these off. We're going to get a little bit of fuel. And just some drips. That'll dry in 2 minutes and we'll be good to go. This is the fuel line for the secondary injectors. Couple banjo bolts, holding those on. So get those stored away. And then these have clips on them. I broke these before. That's what I brought this in here for. To not do that again. Small garage, that little bit of gasoline will go a long way in the smell. I don't want to keep these on because they're brittle plastic. Like I said, I broke them before. So swinging around all this stuff could be an issue. All right, we're already looking a lot better. A little bit of drips of fuel, no big deal. Took the battery off, so fuel pump's not gonna prime and annihilate me. All right, there's a cam position sensor. Okay, I think the next thing we do is, no, that doesn't have to come off. Since the throttle cable just slid out, I need to undo this. And then I think we go for the bolts, and then we try to mess with this here. Let's get all this out so nothing drops down on my engine and explodes it. Oh, my God. Oh, I'm gonna have to shorten this hose. It has gone and cracked a bunch on the fringe there. Okay, that's done. We did plugs when we had this off before, so I'm not going to mess with that because these little things here, those collect water that comes straight out of the vents on like the hatch, go down into there, fill up the spark plug wells, and these things get crazy misfires because of that. So that's sealed. They're working well from what I know, and I'm not going to mess with it. So next thing this is solid, so there's no way I'm going to be able to move it. So then we have to back off a couple of these bolts that hold the charge pipe up against the block. So we'll do the EGR first. Okay, now we can spin these, and our plenum is pretty much free floating. So this is the hard part. I'm going to try to separate these as much as I can. And we undid those last bolts so we can move these around. But you can't move it back more than a 1/4 inch because it hits this valve. This side, I think, nope, this side's the same. You hit the EGR valve over here. So you have no room even after you undo those, which is cool. This would probably be a lot easier if you undid the throttle body, but I think the other side also connects to the, what am I trying to say? To the valve that we're trying to replace. Okay, now we can kind of squish these. What I'm trying to do is get under here, grab onto the lip, and pull. There we go. So I'm just going to leave that one there. Grab another screwdriver. Do the same over here maybe. And then hopefully we can lift the plenum up. I know we have more connections, like wires underneath, so I can't lift it up fully. Wow, why is this side so much tighter? Maybe it's because I have a bigger screwdriver. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Come on, fit under there. Nice. Ah, that was the easiest one so far. There she is. So, got one connector, two connectors, three connectors, and then over here is your fuel pressure. Oh my God. That goes to your fuel pressure regulator. There she is. There's that valve we're trying to replace. Pretty wild looking thing. I don't know why we have like freeze plugs up here because no coolant runs through this. Weird. Let's set this off to the side and take a look up under here. So, mess, right? Your starter in the most inconvenient position. Would that be oil? It's either knock sensor or oil pressure. And then you have these breather pipes. These are where your PCV lines go. They hide completely under the plenum. Your fuel rails, and then your coil packs are back here. Just kind of a mess in there, and everything runs under. So it's a pretty compact design, but pretty much anything that you have to do, you have to get this plenum off. Let's take a look at the threads. I think the reason that becomes an issue is if you look here, I mean, these are like, it's like 5 threads deep, so it's just not very thick for it to be able to grasp onto. Everything looks all right under here. We have, oh, that's fuel from what I just spilled. So this right here is where that idle air control goes into here, and then it comes back into the throttle body under the engine. Here are new Buick injectors we installed recently. Super cheap. All right. So put something down so we can flip this upside down and get to work on that valve. I'm wondering if we just had a breakthrough here. So this line, remember that we pulled off, comes around here and goes into this, and then this line comes off and it just ends. And I'm assuming this is supposed to go somewhere, but if you look up in here, I don't have any lines that could go to that. I have just those two, which are spoken for already by these two things here. So I don't know if this is supposed to just tee into this or something, but I'm missing something. And that is a big enough air leak to be causing it to die. So maybe we don't even need to replace this, but I have it right here, so we're going to. Let's check the numbers. Looks right. Yeah, that's the same valve. So worst case scenario, we just put this in the part storage. One thing I did want to check while we're up here though is our valves. I just did carbon cleaning on my R8 in a different video, so I'm hyper aware of my valve right now. They look pretty good. So although the car is burning some oil through the turbo, I believe, those valves look really crazy clean. It's a wonder what regular injection instead of direct injection will do for your valves. So we have this plenum flipped over and we're going to take off this valve. It's honestly insultingly easy to do for how difficult this plenum is to take off. Just a couple lines, couple clamps, and we have this completely ready to go back in the car. Putting this back in is substantially harder than taking it out. It's just very hard to line up everything that you got going on here while trying to keep those gaskets like centered and not pinching any wires under here. You saw how many wires are under this plenum. And then we have to also get those charge pipes lined in, and with how rigid they are, it's just not the easiest job in the world. But just like anything else, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and this is actually a pretty easy job for me, especially considering what else we've done to this car in the past. Last thing we're going to do is just throw all these bolts in. Very, very light torque spec. I think it's something like 8 or 9 foot-pounds, but I just kind of do it by feel. Then we throw in this trunk liner, attach our overflow bottle, and we're going to throw in some coolant, and I got a couple more things to do before we take this out and get the system bled. Alright, let's get this thing going. First thing I noticed, this car, I finished everything about 2 months ago, and it's just been snowing like crazy since then. We never really get harsh winters, but this one has been bad. The leak that I found is way down in there in a completely accessible area. I bought a cheap radiator, I don't know why, but I really hope it's not the radiator. I'd be shocked if it was that. It's probably just one of these old hoses, but the ground is cold. I don't want to lay on it, so we're going to deal with that next. But first thing we're going to do is try to settle the ride height of this car. So I had these old shocks, or they weren't old, I put these on a little while ago and they already went bad, but these are like, I think 1 3/4 inches diameter. These are 2. So the actual like receiver for the spring on the bottom was a lot smaller on these, or aftermarket spring on top of this. And then these springs are just slightly too small to fit on the receivers of these new gas shocks that I got. So this is the factory spring, and in combination with an aftermarket coilover, it's really just making the car way taller than it needs to be. It's bottomed out down there, and it still has like 3 to 4 inches of wheel gap. So we're gonna pull this one off. I have bought a handful of pieces that I'm hopefully gonna make work. These are from BC, and I just guessed at the thread pitch. That's why I bought a couple different ones. So we're gonna pull these off and see if we can match a thread pitch to get a smaller spring on that will actually fit on top of those. Now we've already done this job in my other videos, so we're just gonna kind of speed through everything. This is a super easy job to do, mainly if you have all the bolts cracked loose and everything's moving. Just like any other suspension bit on a car, if it hasn't been touched in many years, this can really, really be a tough thing to do. That was a new record, 9 minutes to get this out. It's actually pretty simple, 4 bolts on top, these 2 that go through the ball joint, and then the one at the bottom, and then the hardest part's just wiggling it out. But with this view, you can see the taper from the factory spring and how much wider that is than the one that was on there before. And then these new ones, if the thread pitch is right, will fit perfectly, and I can run the aftermarket springs on the aftermarket coilovers and hopefully be able to attain the ride height that I'm looking for. I can tell you straight away it's not this smaller thread pitch. I think we might be onto something with this larger one. Pull this off, I got a new tool to do that, and we'll see what we can do. OEM spring, aftermarket spring. Definitely a difference between the two, huh? So that's about how much wheel gap I had. So I think this goes out of the equation, and we just pray that these thread pitches are right, which is not looking amazing so far. Gotta be honest with you. This is a 2-inch shock. These are both 2 inches. This is definitely the right thread pitch. One of the manufacturers is lying about their size. So my gamble did not pay off. Looks like what I'm going to be doing is finding machine shop and just having them take this down with a lathe. It's got a lot of surface area to be cut off of there to be able to fit this spring. Very much not the right size there. So I guess this thing's gonna be on jack stands for a while because all the machine shops around here are slow as hell. The weather's taking a turn for the better this week, so I was hoping to be able to drive it, but I guess we'll just go with this. Part of me wants to do something sketchy because I love doing cheap, easy, sketchy fixes. So this usually sits like this. Here's your lock nut. And when you tighten them against each other, they stop moving up and down. So I couldn't really put this one on top of this one and just let it sit because this one's free floating and it wouldn't lock down. But what's to stop me from flipping this upside down, using this lock nut to lock it down, and then sliding this over top to receive the spring. That would allow it to twist a little bit, but it's riding on this bushing up top that doesn't allow the spring to twist, so this would just kind of sit like that. I don't know why that would be a bad thing, because this fits super snug onto the coilover. I'm not opposed to giving it a try, so let's do so. Here she is, and I would like to know why this wouldn't work. It's a little thicker down here, but that's okay because we have a shorter spring, so if we can press this up a little bit, we'll have some extra threads down here, and then the car should sit where it should. The spring actually doesn't twist at all in this, so I'm going to go with it. The only thing I'm afraid of is a little bit of a rattle down here, but it's so compressed. I mean, the spring would potentially be able to float on that anyway, so this isn't going to do any floating. So I'm going to get that tightened down, we'll put it back in and see what we get out of that. Exciting. Let's take a closer look at this design here. So this radiator is held in by this cradle, which then has this cover over top of it, and that's where this hose comes out of. If you look right here, if I can get the lighting right, there's not much room to really get to anything, and there's my hose clamp on the bottom of the hose. So the best thing to do would be to come down here, and this is the only access hole that they give you to get to that. And then I don't know how I'm going to pull the hose clamp back or push it out, because then we also have this bolt riding on the hose. So I'm afraid that's where the issue's coming from, but I think it's just a faulty clamp. So I'm gonna try to back this out The hose or the clamp doesn't really line up with the hole, so I'm going to try to get creative there. Then we're going to worm it back this way, fish in a new one, somehow get it connected and tightened up there. But yeah, this is the last place that I wanted the leak to be coming from, and I gave everything I had to make sure that it didn't, and that's the only place that it's leaking. So let's put this down, tackle it, and I'll check back in. All right. We're going to try to use this angle instead. It's not ideal, but if I just got a really long screwdriver, like all the way over here, I could probably get it over. So I'm going to put this one on and get it started before we unclamp that one, because I know that will start spewing coolant because it's already leaking pretty solid amount of coolant. There is no space to do anything. But thankfully I got that started a lot easier than I was expecting. I ended up picking this older hose clamp because the new ones are just so fragile and made out of such poor material that they just strip all the time. And this older one is a little bit more stout. It's got really coarse threads comparatively. So I think this might be able to clamp on a little tighter than the counterparts. I'm excited to get this done so I can stop laying under cars. I've got suspension to do on 2 of my other cars, but it's stuff that I can sit up and do, so I'm really excited about that. Ground's just cold and wet, you know? Okay, this is not cooperating at all. I really don't want to have to like burp the system again, given the radiator's so far away from the engine and low. It's pretty difficult. So I'm going to try to do this with minimal spillage without introducing any air into the system. Oh boy. Now, the other option is to doing it like this, would be to drop the whole radiator cradle, and I gotta remove the oil coolers, and it's like a day or 2 job of like straight work, so don't really want to be doing that. I just got this thing. The next thing I'm running into is this bolt. I can't slide the clamp up because that bolt is touching our hose here. But the fact that I'm barely loosening it and it's starting to drip that much more kind of tells me that that's probably where that's coming from. So that's a good thing at least. Oh yeah, look at all that. Please tell me this isn't a solid backing nut. And it is, but I think that's enough room. The backing nut's attached to this, so I can't move it out of the way. All right, let's try to cut this clamp off. I think I got it.
Great to feel. Come out now. I'm probably also trying to be careful because I don't want to damage any skin if something pops loose.
Oh, this is straight up miserable. Everything's cramped, like in here, but also on my body. Might have to remove this. I'm gonna give it one more tug. Oh, there. No, I thought I did it. I don't know what it's holding on to, honestly. Just really don't want to damage the hose as well. What are you holding on to? It's this that's causing all the issues. Now I can't get the new clamp past that bolt. Bottom right of the hose clamp. See that nut right there? It's touching, and that's what I'm struggling with. We might be far enough in. However, what I'm afraid is when I start tightening this, the actual screw portion is going to start rotating counterclockwise to the point where I can't reach it because the bottom is pinched. Let's see what we can do though, because I would like to have that hose clamp kind of making contact right there, so it doesn't eat away at this hose. It's such a terrible design, honestly. The factory radiator didn't even fit any better either. All right, we got that tightened down. The leak seems to be gone, but now I'm worried about this nut on the other side rubbing through into this. So we're gonna zip tie it up a little bit, and I'm gonna try to just use some force to push this over and tighten it up so it doesn't kind of come over towards the hose clamp. Hard to talk right now. Ugh. Well, I think that's as good as I'm gonna get. I'm gonna try to clean all this up so when I start back up I can see if there's any more leaks. It would be pretty devastated if there was, because that was awful. So just in case we got any air in there, I'm gonna open this, let it breathe while I fill in some more coolant. We're gonna connect the battery and see these prime up, check if there's any leaks before we do anything. Can hear the pump whining a little bit, and I feel dry. We're good to go. So I'm gonna keep this open, drive it over to my favorite parking lot to let it bleed for a minute, and then we'll give it a drive. Come on. All right, I just popped that open to check, and we're overflowing, so I think we're home. Don't see any active dripping, so that's a good sign. And with that new suspension, we have no wheel gap. No tuck or anything, but just perfectly flush. Let's take a look at the back. Yeah, we're sitting pretty much where I was hoping for it to be. Took a lot of work to get it there, but man, that looks good. It'd be hard to say there's a bad looking angle on this car. I mean, this thing is just beautiful. Words don't do justice, neither does the camera. So let's give a test on the IAC. We're about to dump the clutch while we're just cruising along. Looks good to me, or at least better than it was. All right, we're getting warm, so let's give it a quick drive. Pretty dark out here, not a lot of street lights, so I'll just let you hear what this sounds like inside the cabin. Place to give it some gas. We're gonna pop it into first. Here we go. Does not get old, I'll tell you that. Pop. All right, let's give it one more. I just can't stop. I could see the flame out the window on that one. Damn. All right, everything seems to be solid, so I'm gonna hang this up and I will see you next week with another one.